Hi, I'm Richard Costello, and thank you for tuning in to episode number 5 of the Castle podcast. Today, I'm joined by digital economy specialist and director at Sheffield Digital, Mel Kanarek. Mel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Richard. Hi, everyone.
So today, we're going to be talking about a range of topics, including the Sheffield Digital story. So Sheffield Digital is the association for the people and businesses of Sheffield's digital industries. Mel's involvement in the UK Tech Cluster Group, and finally Mel's work and advocacy for Sheffield's innovation ecosystem more broadly. Firstly, I thought it'd be great to give listeners a bit more context about who you are and your career to date, Mel.
Okay, so it's a long story. My career started in public relations and then progressed to include more of the marketing spectrum, and then moved into consultancy that was focused more on how people use the tools of marketing to grow and develop their businesses. I've run my own business a couple of times. I've been involved in a startup. I've run other people's businesses for them. And I've worked both in-house and agency side over the years. I started off in B2C, so I worked in the music industry and the fashion industry and consumer goods and that kind of thing. But actually, I've always been far more interested in business and the business to business side of things, and always been absolutely fascinated by technology. I attempted in my undergraduate days to do a computer science degree, but couldn't quite hack it. But I've always been absolutely fascinated by technology and how it changes our lives. So eventually I brought those two things together, and I was working in public relations for a technology PR agency. And that was in the early 1990s. So I went through Y2K, if anybody remembers that, and the whole dot-com boom and the bust and things that happened during that. But then I came back to Sheffield and I started to get involved in the small business scene in Sheffield and South Yorkshire. And I started to use my experience in marketing and my experience in running businesses to help people to develop and grow their businesses. And most often those were small agencies and small technology companies. And so by doing that in and around Sheffield, I started to really build my understanding of the local tech ecosystem, and that's mostly where I play now, although I am actually supposed to be retired. I seem to be doing a horrible job of that because I can't bear to be out of the loop, and I keep sticking my nose back in and getting involved in stuff again.
Yeah, no, it's great that you're involved in so many different things, and yeah, I met you first at the Sheffield Digital Senior Leaders Dinner a couple of months ago, and yeah, it was a really interesting talk that you gave, and it was my first kind of induction into that community, and yeah, and myself and a couple of the team were there, and it was a really good evening. So yeah, really glad we came and happened to bump into you. So I guess moving into the Sheffield Digital piece then, I remember when I did actually meet you at that event, we did actually touch on this, and I remember thinking this sounds really interesting, just and really inspiring about how Sheffield Digital did come about, particularly given that I was also and sort of am also looking at how we as an agency build a community in Sheffield, albeit a slightly more niche one around B2B marketing. But what is the Sheffield Digital story, and how did the organisation come about?
So the story goes back nearly 10 years now. Myself and a bunch of other people that I got to know who were in one way or another working in the tech industry in Sheffield, we started to talk about how there was lots going on, really interesting companies doing interesting work, but nobody knew anything about it. Nobody knew each other. There were no events, there was no meetup scene. It was very disconnected and very much under the radar. And then we looked around at other places and thought, well, in other places around the country where you would say there's a digital cluster there was this sense that they were connected up and there was a hub and somewhere you could go for information. And we started to think, well, that's kind of what we need in Sheffield. We need to unlock what's going on by bringing people together. And for a while, we we were sort of hopeful that maybe the public sector would put their weight behind it or help set something up. And there were a couple of attempts, but never really engaged properly with the businesses. And we started to get frustrated. And eventually myself and these other people who were the other 4 co-founders of Sheffield Digital, we had just been sat in another meeting where nothing that we wanted to happen had happened. And we were having a little complaint about it in the corner. And I just turned to them and I said, why don't we just do it? Why don't we make our own organization and go out and tell people that that's what we're doing? And if people look at us and go, well, you're crazy, that's a stupid idea, then we'll know there isn't really a demand. But maybe it'll be what they want. So we decided we were going to do it and that we were going to call it Sheffield Digital. And myself and one of the other directors, Chris Diamond, started going around and talking to people and saying, hey, we think Sheffield needs this organisation to act as a hub and a focal point for the people and the businesses in technology in Sheffield. So we're going to do it. We're going to put up a website. We're going to start sending out newsletters. And what do you think? And nobody told us it was a stupid idea. Everyone was like, that's really great. We need this so badly. That would be such a good thing. So it became a thing. We had a really sort of clunky self-designed logo and a clunky little website, although Chris will probably be upset if he heard me say that. And we started collecting stories and sending out a newsletter. And I started going around to some of the larger organisations and businesses in Sheffield saying, please, will you give us some money to help us get this off the ground? Chris and I were both freelancers, so we needed something that was going to help pay for the time that we were putting in. And we were able to recruit founder members, different organisations. Sumo Digital were a founder member. Tech North, which doesn't exist anymore, was a founder member. Lightwork Design, which is now part of Siemens. A few other organisations helped get us off the ground. And after we've been doing this for about 9 months or so, we started thinking, okay, this has got legs. So we decided we need to put this on a proper footing and become a company. And we decided to be a company limited by guarantee because that's a not profit-making organisation, doesn't have any shareholders. And the idea was that any money we raised would go back into running the organisation. A really talented designer who worked for Yumi at the time designed our logo as you see it now and helped us create the website as you see it now, although that's been through quite a few iterations. And I had to go to the company of cutlers and ask their permission to use the word Sheffield in our company name because Sheffield is a protected name. It's a trademark in its own right, owned by the company of cutlers. But they very graciously said yes, because we weren't making cutlery, so we weren't competing with any of their members. And that's Sheffield Digital. So we were officially incorporated in 2016, and we've been doing it ever since. And when we incorporated officially, we also set up a membership scheme in order to raise money to fund the work that we do. And we are supported by the community, by the companies, the businesses, and the individuals in Sheffield who think that Sheffield Digital is a good idea, and they're prepared to pay a subscription in order to keep us going. And that's kind of the story where we stand now. I can't believe it's been that long. I always joke that in the course of that time I've turned grey, but not through worry, maybe just through hard work.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing story, and I get just on the point about the 10-year anniversary next year. Are there any plans to do anything in particular to sort of mark that milestone?
So I guess it will be 2016. So it's a year and a bit away. It would be the official 10-year anniversary. And yes, I'm sure we'll plan something. I mean, in 2025, in February, we'll be having our annual general meetup. which is our, I guess, the biggest get-together that we run during the year. But that is members only. So if you want to come along and be part of that, you need to join as a member. And I'm pleased to say Kasla already are members, so they'll get an invitation.
Yeah, no, and I think as well, one of the things that I remember actually just chatting with the team about when we did register as a company member, well, maybe 3-4 months ago, something like that, was it how affordable it was. And I think that was a really good thing, that for a business, it's I guess it's more of a kind of, do you actually want to get involved, rather than it being, well, for a business of our size, it's something that it was kind of a no-brainer for us, really. We should have actually got involved a lot sooner.
Yeah.
Reflecting back, but yeah, better late than never. It's not too late, to be fair. I mean, one of the things you mentioned kind of in passing around the reason for Sheffield Digital coming about was to be this hub and focal point for tech and digital in Sheffield, and perhaps a little bit more widely as well in terms of in the region. What have been the kind of advantages that come about from that? I know that might seem like quite an obvious question, but it'd be interesting to just get your take about why is that so important?
So it's important because if you're going to be an effective cluster, if you're really going to tap into the potential of a group of companies that are geographically co-located, there needs to be really open lines of communication between organizations, and there needs to be a way that people can find each other in order to collaborate or to share ideas or to find talent. And if that connection is missing, people have to work 3-4 times as hard to make the connections that they need. Whereas if you can remove that friction, if you can make it easy to be part of a business community, then really exciting things happen. And we have examples of startups that have actually come about because two people have met through the Sheffield Digital community and talked about what they're passionate about and realized that they've got the idea for a business. And, that business has then set up, grown, and been acquired, all within the space of a few years. So you get that kind of very tangible growth. You get things like the meetup scene. Before we really got Sheffield Digital going, there were a couple of small meetups that happened, but there wasn't the variety, and there wasn't this kind of the sense that you could set up a meetup that was quite specialized and then find your audience for that meetup, find somewhere for it to take place, maybe find a sponsor. And just because we provided that connection point for people, they were able to say, hey, I think I'm going to start I'm trying to think of an example here. I'm going to start an R meetup. And, is anyone else interested? And then a bunch of people say, yeah, I'd be really interested. And, I'd like to speak about this and that kind of thing. And then someone else would say, you can come and do it in our offices because we've got a community room that's big enough. And those sorts of things happen. The other thing that I think is important, and I hope other people do as well, is we've really put Sheffield on the map in terms of the fact that there is a tech cluster here, and there are really exciting companies because we make noise about companies. We're visible on the web, and the news stories we publish are visible. Whenever the public sector wants to understand what's going on in tech and who the interesting companies are, they always come and ask us. If there are businesses looking to move to the city and perhaps set up a branch office or move their company here, they find us and they can see that through us they can connect to other businesses, potential suppliers and collaborators, that kind of thing. And if you look at other cities like, say, Manchester or Bristol, where you would say, the tech scene is really happening there, you'll see as well that they've got a really strong cluster organisation that is part of that scene.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense, and I think a lot of the things that you're saying I've experienced directly myself, in the sense of when I was considering I was freelancing and was working remotely and considering where to move, and I was living in the Lake District. And I think I've mentioned this to a few people who've kind of said, why Sheffield? And I was researching. There was a few different factors. Like, my mum used to live here. My older sister was born here, so there's a bit of a family connection. But one of the things was, when I was researching, I came across Sheffield Digital, and it wasn't as though it was kind of, other cities didn't have that, but it was kind of reassuring to see there's this organization that's around the kind of companies that we would be involved with, in terms of, I was thinking ahead about, the business that I wanted to create. And so seeing that existed, and things like the Sheffield Tech Parks as well, that was another thing that I noticed that kind of just comes up if you kind of search for that sort of thing. And then the other point is that now being here, that has acted as a kind of directory of the Sheffield Digital website, and members page has acted as a kind of reference point and directory for potential kind of people to meet and discuss things with, and so on, and our events that we've run, and many of them are focused around that group of people. And then I think the other thing as well is it creates this sense of this thing you can bounce off, in terms of you were at the Sheffield Digital senior leaders dinner a few months ago, or I think I reached out to some people to invite them to our event, and many of the people did actually come, or replied and said, thanks so much for the invite, but I can't make it. But it was kind of this thing that A, I knew who was there, and B, it kind of created this shared connection. And I think that's quite important in terms of making it so that it's not just a fully sort of, if you're reaching out to people, you've got that commonality, like, so we're both both members of Sheffield Digital. It'd be great to, if you could come to our event, or great to meet up for coffee and learn about what you're up to. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But I think for us, it's more of a kind of business relationship side of things, rather than because we sort of support tech and digital businesses rather than being a tech or digital business ourselves. But I can imagine it's even more interesting. And I know definitely the stories. I mean, I think it actually came up at our event a couple of weeks ago. I think a couple of member companies are collaborating, where they're both collaborating on projects together, but also referring each other work. So like, when, for instance, one of them gets a project where it's not quite the right fit, they can pass it on, and vice versa between them, which means they can serve their customers better as well, because they can kind of, if they're not quite the right fit, they can help someone else, but it also keeps the business within the city as well. Next one, and obviously kind of, we've discussed Sheffield Digital coming up to 10 years now. How has the organisation evolved over time?
So I think the main evolution is that once we started to build our membership base, so that we could see that we had a fairly stable level of income that we could project forward with, that enabled us to hire some freelancers to help with the activity. So most people will know Emma Marshall, Claire Fletcher, and Sarah Lister, who are the freelancers who are really behind everything that you see. So Emma spends about a day a week working with companies and, helping to create the events that our companies come to. Claire does about a day a week, and she does all the amazing content that you see on the website and in the newsletter. And Sarah, again, about 1 day a week, and she's the magician who makes sure that everybody's memberships run smoothly. She runs our mentoring program, which is hugely successful, really popular, and something that I'm so proud of. And that's down to Sarah and the work that she's done. And she also keeps me organized and makes sure that memberships are getting sorted out, and she helps with the social media as well. And without those three people, Sheffield Digital, as you know, just wouldn't be able to exist. It used to rely on myself and Chris Diamond to do stuff in our spare time and when we could manage it, but being able to use the money that our members are paying us to support these freelancers to keep everything running is what makes Sheffield Digital look so much bigger than it actually is. And people are really surprised when I tell them there is no full-time Sheffield Digital team. There's no managing director or ops person or anything like that. There are just, the volunteer board and our new members board and these amazing freelancers who keep it all running. So I think the other evolution that I would point out is that because we've been doing this for a long time, we've built up a lot of institutional knowledge about the tech scene in Sheffield and South Yorkshire, about how policy influences tech companies, about how what tech companies need in terms of talent and skills, how they recruit, how they interact with the various educational institutions in the region. And we're quite often called upon to help make those connections so that the public sector side of things, the policy and the education and that kind of thing, so that side of things in the region can connect with what businesses are trying to do and perhaps what businesses need from them. And I think that's very valuable. There is much more that we could do, but with the way that we operate now and with the money that we're able to bring in now, we're kind of at our limit in terms of what we can do.
Yeah, and you're just sort of touching on perhaps this side of things, but what would be the vision for the future of Sheffield Digital?
My vision for Sheffield Digital has always been that we be an organisation like they have in other core cities, where you've got a full-time staff, you've got a managing director who is the figurehead, the person going out and advocating for the tech industry, and really putting Sheffield's industry on the map. You've got someone who specialises in the whole thing around skills and inclusion and diversity, because those are things that our industry always struggles with. And in other cities, they're running really amazing programs to encourage more women into industry, more people from diverse backgrounds into the industry. And we're not able to do that work here. We'd have someone whose job it was to do events, because events are very, very well, you know this, they're time consuming, they're hard to put on. And there's always a real swan effect going on where the event looks lovely, but everyone's paddling frantically underneath. So having someone who focused on that and who could also help support all the meetups in the city more than we're able to do now. Someone doing marketing, public relations, content, building our profile outside of the region even more, really showing how we have an amazing and really exciting tech cluster here in Sheffield. Those are the things I would like us to do, but you need serious income to do that. And because the business base in Sheffield and South Yorkshire is small compared to Manchester or London, there are only so many companies we can go to and only so much we can ask them to pay in terms of membership. There are only so many companies you can, professional services companies you can ask to sponsor you. And much as I hate to say it, either we need a fairy godmother or father, for that matter, who comes along and says, I really believe in what you're trying to do, and I want to give you a huge wad of cash to kickstart you into this next step. Or we need the public sector to do that. And, with the economy and the state of public finances at the moment, that just isn't realistic. It's not going to happen. So we continue doing what we do. We fully intend to keep doing Sheffield Digital for as long as people will support us. And eventually we will find a way to take this big step up. But at this point, I couldn't tell you how we're going to do that.
No, thanks for explaining that. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, certainly from my point of view, dealing with the people that you've mentioned. Emma took time to meet with me and Saskia for a coffee when we were exploring joining Sheffield Digital. And I remember, just really appreciating the fact that this was somebody who was really experienced, had, probably loads on, but still had the time to probably take an hour out of their day to meet with a, really, really small business. And then also Claire wrote a really great article about Kassler in the newsletter, and I think might have gone on the website. And then also Sarah's been brilliant to deal with in terms of the mentoring, and also things like the Slack channel, and also kind of there's been various sort of ad hoc things that we've worked together on, particularly opportunities where she's sort of looked to, I guess, promote what we're up to, which has been really, really good. And I think it's one of those things where I think you maybe said as well that it's surprising that there's not people working full time, because that would have been what I'd have thought, both from kind of just the online presence, but also from kind of working with Sarah in particular. Like, she just seems to be kind of all on top of it, in a really thorough way. So it's a great team. So I feel like the sort of the energy is really positive. So I would personally feel optimistic, but you'll be closer to it than me. You kind of alluded, you mentioned the tech cluster group, just moving on to the next section, because it sort of naturally, I guess, kind of expands out a bit. But I know you're involved in the UK tech cluster group representing South Yorkshire. I guess might be worth, I'm conscious that we didn't actually write this down in the questions, but it might be worth just briefly explaining what the UK tech cluster group is, and then also kind of how it came about that you're representing South Yorkshire on it.
Okay, so the UK Tech Cluster Group is an informal organisation made up of a lot of the tech cluster organisations around the UK that are outside of London. I've actually been involved in it since before it was officially the UK Tech Cluster Group. So when I was working with the other founders to set up Sheffield Digital, I reached out to the managing director of Manchester Digital, an amazing woman called Katie Gallagher, and just said, can I pick your brains, please? Because I'm trying to do what you've been doing for years in Manchester, and I'd like to learn how. And she was really, really helpful. And then she and I and a few other people doing similar things started meeting up informally just to help each other out, just to talk about, how's it going? How are you doing in terms of building your cluster organization in your city or your region? And what can we learn from each other? And gradually over time, the number of people working on clusters coming to those get-togethers increased, and at some point it sort of semi-formalized into what's now called the UK Tech Cluster Group. So there's representation from, let me see if I can get all of these, Newcastle in the northeast, Hull, Leeds, Manchester, Sheffield and South Yorkshire, Birmingham in the West Midlands, Bristol and the South West, Brighton and Sussex, and sort of Tech East, which is Norfolk and Suffolk. I don't think and the Scotland organisation, which is called Scotland IES, and also the Welsh organisation, which is called Tramshed Tech, because their first cluster building was in a converted tram shed. So those are kind of the core members of the UK Tech Cluster Group. And we came together originally just to be a support organisation, but then to start actually advocating for tech in the regions. Because for central government, for people based in Westminster, all they know is London, and maybe London and Oxford, Cambridge, the Reading corridor. That's all they know, and that's all they know about the tech industry. And so we've started to be a real voice speaking up for all the tech clusters around the country and really advocating for the fact that policy needs to work for all of the regions of the UK, not just for London and the surrounding areas, because so much of the tech industry is concentrated around London and the southeast in terms of where the investment goes and where the research funding goes and that kind of thing, and companies in the regions are missing out. So this is something that the UK Tech Cluster Group advocates for very strongly. I would really encourage people to check them out online and have a look at some of the reports that they've published, because they are very easy to read and easy to understand recommendations around policy. And I think it's important that businesses think about policy. I know it seems like a weird thing. You're too busy running your business, but the policy that's being made in Westminster affects every business in the UK. And if they're making policy around tech, if they're making policy around investment, if they're making policy about where research funding goes, then businesses should be aware of that and should have a say in that. And that's what the UK Tech Cluster Group is all about.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and it's really nice to see, I guess, how it's also sort of sprung up organically from all of the organically sprung up regional groups. Then coming up together, it's sort of it's I guess a similar sort of way that Sheffield Digital came about, but just on a national level, in terms of just people sort of learning, starting relationships, connecting with people, and then seeing about then subsequently creating something more formalized. I mean, one thing that's you might not have a view on this, but I think I heard this perhaps in a podcast recently, that there's likely to be sort of further devolution of powers into sort of regions or cities. I hope I'm not kind of totally making that up. I think that's one of the kind of government plans. Is that one of the things that you feel and the UK Tech Cluster Group feel would be beneficial? Or I don't know what your view is on that.
So you haven't made that up. It is definitely a thing. It's being talked about a lot at the moment. The government is working on a new industrial strategy, and a big chunk of that is around what should be devolved more to the regions. And we're lucky in Sheffield because we are in a devolved region. So, we have the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, which brings together the 4 local authorities in South Yorkshire. That's Sheffield, Doncaster, Rotherham and Barnsley. And because we have that, because we have our mayor, the mechanism is there for more funding to be devolved down to the regions. And what that means is that the decisions, government funding comes down. I'm waving my hands around now, which you can't see on a podcast, but government funding comes from the centre, from Westminster, down to the regions. So in this case, down to the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. And the idea behind devolution is that the decision making about how that money gets spent should be made at the combined authority level. It shouldn't be Westminster telling us how we should spend that money. And normally you hear about it being talked about in terms of things like transport, public transport, and adult social care, and housing policy. And all of those things are really, really important. And, I wouldn't argue with that being devolved at all. But what's interesting from my perspective is when you start to devolve the decision making around business support, around perhaps even how business and education collaborate, around what sort of organisations are supported. So, giant plug here. wouldn't it be amazing if the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority decided that they would take some of their funding and put it behind an organisation like Sheffield Digital, so that Sheffield Digital could do the things that it's not able to do at the moment. So devolution is really interesting and really exciting, but we also have to be realistic about what the priorities are. And at the Mayoral Combined Authority, in somewhere like South Yorkshire, which has got some real challenges around deprivation, around health, around low productivity, and people not working, those are big, hairy problems that the Combined Authority has to get to grips with. So me banging along, out on the sidelines saying, there's all this really cool technology going on, and, you should really support these businesses and help them, and help them get angel investment, blah, blah, blah. It's perhaps not going to be as high on the radar as I would like. Of course, that won't stop me banging on about it. And there's plenty of other people in Sheffield and South Yorkshire who bang on about it as well.
It's really interesting, and it would be really interesting to see how it plays out. And I'm aware of an organisation called Tech SY, I think, which I imagine you're familiar with, that I think are related to that South Yorkshire Combined Mayoral Authority, or maybe it's the Mayoral Combined Authority.
So Tech SY is a new programme funded by the Combined Authority, and it's being run by the amazing Tracy Johnson of Barnsley Council and Barnsley Digital Media Centre fame. So big, hooray for Tracy. And they're trying to do things to raise the profile of technology in South Yorkshire, to encourage startups and scale-ups, perhaps to make the business support system easier to access and a bit more clear for people. Their Tech SY, I think I'm really, really pleased to see it happening. And I don't think Tracy would be upset with me if I said it's still in the process of figuring out what it's actually doing. They're doing a lot of really good planning work at the moment. And it's when you're running a public sector funded program, you've always got to juggle so many different demands and make sure that, the program is providing value for money because it's taxpayers' money that it's spending, and doing something that will have some sort of long-term impact on the problem you're trying to solve. So for now, I think Tech SY is figuring out how to do it. They are having in March of next year a tech summit, which I think will be really, really interesting. So I would encourage people to get that date in their diary and think about going along to that. I think it's going to be held in Doncaster, and that should be a very cool day.
Yeah, I think I just might have seen that. I think I've signed up to something, and I think it might be that, but that's definitely something to make a mental note about. Moving on to it's kind of potentially slightly blurring into one another, but have got this kind of final section around the Sheffield ecosystem, and so you're working on, and we've kind of just had this chat about what you're up to, and you're working on developing the Sheffield technology, digital and broader business ecosystem in Sheffield alongside all the other things you're doing. What is the ecosystem you're trying to build, and what are you trying to achieve? What are some of the challenges?
So the first thing I should say is that nobody's paying me to do anything around the ecosystem. It's just something I'm passionate about, very interested in. A couple of years ago, I did a research project that was funded by the Combined Authority and both universities, and I did it with Kerry Batchelder, and we looked at the innovation ecosystem in South Yorkshire and tried to identify what some of the challenges were for that ecosystem. An ecosystem, it's already there, it exists. I think the question is, how do we make it stronger? How do we make it serve the different players in the ecosystem better? And how do we make it more productive, more successful for Sheffield and South Yorkshire? For me, when an ecosystem is really thriving, you have this virtual upward spiral of people making connections, people working with universities, people being able to pull in funding, funders getting excited and coming in, the public sector understanding its role in supporting businesses and providing the right support. You have a network effect where it's very easy for people to find out what they need to find out. It's very easy for them to plug into potential collaborators. And you have a buzz, you have a noise going on so that people from outside the area are looking in going, there is something really interesting happening here in Sheffield, and we need to go there. We need to take our business there. We need to develop our next product there. And it becomes a self-fueling thing. But for that to happen, you need the connections to be made, and you need all the players in the ecosystem to be strong. And the things I'm going to say now, I will stress, are very much my opinion, my personal opinion. I'm not speaking now on behalf of Sheffield Digital or any other organisation. This is just me, what I've observed, what I've learnt in all the years that I've been knocking around in Sheffield. And I think that we have the different players in the ecosystem have different amounts of strength and weakness, and we need to balance that out more. And this is changing all the time. So up until quite recently, the public sector weren't particularly interested in tech. And when they talked about innovation, they were talking about companies like Gripple. And Gripple is a fantastic company and a world-beating company, but they do things with wire. And yes, I'm sure they're using technology, but they're not using technology as I think about it. Or the public sector would talk about advanced manufacturing. And advanced manufacturing it's all about technology now. But people don't often make that connection. So you've got strengths and weaknesses in terms of how the public sector are thinking about innovation and whether they're able to do things to support innovation. And the public sector in our region really hasn't up until recently, but I'm starting to see that change. We've got two amazing universities, and we're so lucky. We've got two really good universities, and they're very complementary in terms of their approach and the things that they do. But it's only recently that we're starting to see more spin-outs from the University of Sheffield, that we're starting to see more applied focus from Sheffield Hallam University. There's, massive potential there, but at the moment, we all know the universities are struggling. All around the country, universities are struggling, and that includes both of our universities here. So whether they are going to be able to continue to be strong, or whether we're going to see some weakness there in terms of their ability to support and be part of an innovation ecosystem, we'll have to see. Funding has always been a challenge for Sheffield and South Yorkshire. We don't really attract venture capital money in the way that we should. We don't have an angel investor network in Sheffield, and we really, really should. It's my understanding that there are quite a few high net worth individuals in around Sheffield, but they don't look at investing in technology. Some of them do. I'm not going to name names, but there are people who are doing amazing stuff. I would love to see a lot more. It would be amazing to have a really active angel investor network, because that's the first level. When people start a technology-based business, the initial level of funding they need is small, relatively small chunks that come from angel investment that sets a company up so it can then go on to attract larger, VC-based investment. Also, not enough companies in Sheffield attract research and development funding. So, Innovate UK and UKRI sort of funding. There are ones that do, and they do really well at it, but there should be a lot more of that coming into our ecosystem. Skills and talent, I've talked about. It's a challenge. We need to make the connections between industry and education much stronger. We need to be talking to people much earlier on about potential careers in technology-based businesses, and we need to be talking to a much more diverse range of people about careers in technology-based businesses. And we need to pay people to do the job of being the glue within an ecosystem. You mentioned Emma Marshall and the way that she connects people and introduces them to each other and that kind of thing. It's something that Kerry Batchelder and I do if we're asked. When we had the Team SY program, we had Laura Bennett and Samantha Deakin also doing that role. But at the moment, there's nobody really being paid to be the glue, to say to one business, you should be talking to this other business, or to say to a business, this is how you talk, this is who you go to talk to the universities. You'd be better off going to Hallam, or you'd be better off going to Uni of, or now we've got the South Yorkshire Innovation Programme, fantastic. But someone needs to say, oh, you know what, you should go and talk to the innovation programme. So being the glue is really, really important. And just thinking back to the research that Kerry and I did, the sorts of challenges, the other sorts of challenges that we identified is the fact that innovation and entrepreneurship is not very visible. We're not telling enough stories about our successful innovators and our successful entrepreneurs. We're not making those role models easy to spot and easy to get inspiration from. There isn't enough mentoring going on in the ecosystem. We do what we can at Sheffield Digital. I know that there are individuals who, off their own bat, do what they can. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had a really well-organised, formalised business mentoring network for innovators and entrepreneurs? Imagine what that could do, how that could really accelerate the growth of interesting businesses. I'm sorry, I'm gazing at my notes here. We need to collect better data. We don't do enough to collect data about our innovation people, our entrepreneurs, our growing businesses. And you need that data when you're going to make arguments about policy. And again, Tech SY is starting to approach this because they're using the Deal Room platform to start to gather data. And I think probably also some Bohurst data goes in there as well. So these are all things, all of these elements come together to form a thriving ecosystem. But that needs to be somebody's job. And at the moment, it isn't anybody's job.
It's really fascinating, all of the moving parts. I think one thing that I notice about Sheffield, and this is, I'm obviously not anywhere near as familiar with the city and the economy of the city as you are, but one of the things I notice is that I think a lot of people do stay in Sheffield after university, for example. But I wonder the proportion of those that do stay that are in technology or digital or the kind of innovation type of careers. That would be my question. I mean, so I wonder whether that's aligns with how you see things, that there's so much good talent in Sheffield coming out of the universities and staying, but are they going into that, the sectors of the future as much as they might potentially?
No, they're not. Unfortunately, we're losing them to London and Manchester and other places. We need to do a better job of explaining to young people that having your first job in a startup or a small business may feel a bit risky, but actually it's an amazing opportunity, because rather than going to join a graduate program in some large organization where you get to do one little piece of a job for 2 years, you go and work in a startup, or you go and work in a small, up and coming organization. You're going to get to do everything. You're going to get to learn really, really fast. You're going to get to really be part of the team. You're going to have to think on your feet. You're going to have to be agile. You're going to learn how to talk to customers, all those kinds of things. The opportunities are massive, but we don't explain that. And we don't explain that to people's parents either. And, when you're coming out of uni and looking at your first job, your parents are going to be looking, "Oh, is that secure? Is that a good idea? Ooh, they look like a very small company," that kind of thing. So we need to tell that story about what it's really like to go and work in a small business. We need to tell that story better. I've always worked in small businesses. I don't do well in large organizations. I don't do well with hierarchy either. But in a small organization, a small team where I can bounce off people and I can do different things, and that's when I'm really effective, and that's when I have fun. I'd love more people to have that experience too.
Yeah, it's definitely what I enjoy as well. I think I've just steadily in my career moved from bigger organizations to smaller organizations over time broadly. I mean, that is actually what's happened. And each time I've gone to something smaller, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it more, I think. But I think it's probably like a lot of it is a personality thing. But as you say, being able to, I mean, we had an experience ourselves. We recruited somebody in the second half of this year. And in that recruitment process, we invited one of the candidates to do a second interview, and they'd been offered a job in the meantime. I think possibly by the university, but certainly by a much bigger organisation. And they said, thanks very much for the invitation to the final interview, but I've just accepted this job. So, which is totally reasonable. But I think I reflected at the time that probably was somebody thinking, this is a really small business. I'm not sure whether it's. But then I did feel as though, knowing what I know and knowing what I know about what it's like working for Castler, hopefully people enjoy it. And I did feel as though it was sort of like I would never have picked personally, so it was a bit confusing to me, because I was like, I would have never chosen to work for a really big organization over a really small one, because I've had the experience of seeing what both are like. And I know that, if you work in a really small business, as you were saying, you can just immediately take on so many different things and have full ownership for things from, almost immediately, which I think is a really useful thing for people's career and sort of development as people. Conscious we're probably slightly overrunning what we envisaged from a timing perspective, but if you've got a moment, we can cover off the final few questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool.
I've been rabbiting on too much.
Oh no, not at all. No, it's great. So I mean, and also if any of these you feel you've already kind of covered, because we might have covered some of these at least in part. But you've mentioned when we were chatting the other day around Sheffield having a marketing challenge. What do you mean by that?
So again, stressing that this is my personal opinion. So the whole time I've been around Sheffield, which is over 30 years now, I've heard people say, "Oh, Sheffield doesn't shout about itself. We're a best kept secret. we're modest Yorkshire folk. We don't like to, blow our own trumpet, blah, 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 all this kind of thing. I think it's a dangerous, self-fulfilling myth. And I think you'll see, there are a few businesses that are good at promoting. There's the amazing work that the City Council does around the visitor economy. So, the whole outdoor city and all the festivals and the food and the beer. And, the Guardian says, oh, we're the funkiest place to come and visit for a weekend, that kind of thing. That's all brilliant. I love that stuff. But that's B2C, isn't it? And what we need is some business to business marketing. And at the moment, it tends to be, we used to be steel, but now we're advanced manufacturing. But that's only exciting if you're already immersed in the world of advanced manufacturing. And I think part of the problem is that there's this constant wrangling about, we've got, what's our message? What's our one thing that we're going to say? And the thing is, and every city tries to do this, but actually, if you really look at Sheffield, what we're really good at is getting stuff done. We are really innovative. We are really good with technology. We are really good at inventing new ways of doing things. And so I think we need the courage to try and pin it on one sector, to not say it's all about manufacturing, or for a while with technology, it was all about EdTech, technology for education. But actually, we're good at all of these things. And what's exciting is just how much we're good at. And I think that's what the message should be, because I'm out there and I don't even work anymore. And I'm still finding out about exciting tech-based businesses and exciting tech stories. If I can find them, imagine what someone whose job it is could do, all the stories they could dig up, all the stories that they could tell. There is so much innovation going on. There is so much talent. There are so many people working so hard, and there are so many world-beating successes happening here in Sheffield. That's what we need to be shouting about. But again, I keep coming back to it. You can't expect people to do this in their spare time. You can't expect them to do it on top of their day job. You've got to make it somebody's job. And I think that Tech SY is going to be doing some of that. But again, I'm concerned about whether they've got enough resource. I'm concerned about how long that program is going to be funded for. We need to get past this Sheffield thing of trying to do everything on a shoestring and trying to do, take advantage of people's goodwill and everything. That will only take you so far. It's only taken Sheffield Digital so far. Make it somebody's job and give them permission to just go out and tell these stories, because you won't have any problem finding the stories. They are there waiting to be told.
Yeah, love that. No, it's a great rallying cry, and I think I'm constantly uncovering, as you were kind of alluding to. Every time I think we've got our list of Sheffield tech companies, B2B tech companies for us. There's always something else that just pops up every now and again. I mean, there's a couple of ones that come to mind that we've seen. I haven't actually spoken to these businesses yet, and they haven't. I think we probably did maybe invite some of them to events. But there's one called Exciting Instruments, which you probably might have come across them, but they look really interesting. And then also one called Opteran, which I think, I'm not sure whether they're a member of Sheffield Digital, but I think Opteran are using some sort of they've sort of copied the way that an insect works, and they're sort of effectively like creating a digital version of how an insect kind of, I can't remember, maybe it's the insect's nervous system or eyes or something like that.
Opteran is just mind-blowing stuff. So this has come out of the University of Sheffield. Fantastic. There's all this research going on in the university, and it's starting to come out in businesses. So they look at how a bee's brain works. and how a bee's vision works and how a bee navigates its world. And they've used AI to turn that into a tool to help robots navigate. So essentially, you're learning about a bee's brain. You're using technology to turn that into code, and then you're using that to help robots navigate a factory or whatever. I mean, this sort of thing just makes me so excited and so happy because it's just so interesting. And I think everyone in Sheffield should know. Everyone should know that we've got a company that has translated how a bee's brain works in order to help robots operate.
Yeah, it's super cool, and I think it's the type of thing as well. I think that that tie-in of having the universities, because as you said, it's a Sheffield spin out, and I think it's I guess leveraging the amount of deep knowledge that you get from people in academia, and then having that route for them to take things that they uncover. I mean, we actually went to meet with a Nottingham University spin out recently, and it was that same story there. They've come up with a really innovative tool for basically repairing engines, so aircraft engines particularly, in a way that sort of means that they're far less likely to get damaged. It's a very niche use case, but actually it's something that is really important and it also has a very strong kind of environmental aspect to it, because it means that more things can be repaired, and the fundamental sort of role of their business over time is to look at how there can be a more circular sort of economy ultimately. And that was again by a sort of, I think it was a professor at Nottingham Uni who was sort of studying that, perhaps doing a PhD, and then uncovered, actually, if we use electronic current to remove the bolts or something along those lines, or still reading up about it and learning about it, rather than just physical force just wrenching them out, it will mean that there's far less damage made when we do it, and then was given the funding from, I think, initially the university, but also now subsequently a few other funds. I think the British Design Fund being one of them. And so I think having that kind of pipeline where a really interesting sort of deep tech kind of idea can then be taken out into fruition is a great kind of pipeline and mechanism to have in place. I think finally, just moving on then we've got a couple of questions that we ask all of the guests about B2B marketing, which I know you alluded to earlier. I know we haven't really covered it too much in the actual main body of the podcast, but this is technically a B2B marketing sort of themed podcast. And I know obviously you've mentioned that you obviously have worked substantially in B2B marketing, as well as all of the other things you've been involved in. So if you could advise B2B businesses to do one thing in their marketing, what would it be?
So I would say, don't forget that businesses are still about people. There's decisions that are being made by people, but they're maybe using a different set of criteria than if they were making a decision about, what new saucepan to buy. You need to understand those people and what influences their thought processes, all the different elements that are going on into their decision making, and the constraints that business puts around their decision making. And then you can use that understanding to build a relationship.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think people commonly talk about. I think it came up actually at the event that we ran on a couple of weeks back. People said, remember that people are still humans, but it's about humans in a business context. And as you say, there's a lot of people behave in quite different ways in where you've got a business purchase where perhaps your career might be, or your literally your job security might be resting upon your purchasing decisions in a substantial way. And on to the final question then. So what's your most contrarian take when it comes to B2B marketing?
I'm going to show my age here. During a big chunk of my career, there was no social media. There wasn't even email for some of my career. I used to send press releases out using a fax machine, if you can believe that. So no social media, and so it was very hard to get data. So you didn't have a lot of data to inform your strategy, to inform which tactics you were going to use, that kind of thing. And I wonder sometimes if there's a risk now that you get so hung up on the metrics, on what you can measure and interpreting what you're measuring in order to decide what you're going to do next, that you lose sight of the room for creativity, and you lose sight of what the real objective is. And what the real objective is about creating relationships with people. And while I think data is vital to our career now, to what we do, don't let it obscure the fact that you're still dealing with people.
I think that's a great take. Yeah, it sort of resonates with me. I think that I think Rory Sutherland. There's this famous quote by Rory Sutherland, who you may have come across, but he's not really B2B specific, but he says there's this kind of joke he made, which is, my marketing's so efficient it no longer works, and it's about it's all about kind of looking at all these ways that they, kind of, you can optimize and optimize and optimize such that it then sort of stops actually. I think the other there's somebody called Tom Goodwin who talks a lot about this kind of obsession with measurement and how it doesn't actually really align with. So, for instance, a lot of digital marketing revolves around clicks, but clicks apparently don't. In a B2C context, this is, so it's not something I'm not super familiar with, but apparently a kind of a click-through rate is not actually a very good measure of advertising, but because it's the most easy thing to measure in terms of, it's so tangible, it becomes this kind of massive outcome. So he makes this argument that people should be looking at digital advertising a bit more like billboards, in terms of actually just trying to make people see them, kind of consume them and enjoy them and remember them, rather than immediately take an action. But yeah, so it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so to wrap up, thanks so much for coming on. It's been brilliant, and it covered so much ground. I think that it's a really inspiring story, the Sheffield Digital origin story. I remember when we were first talking at that event, and I think you were talking about how it came about. It was just super interesting. I think particularly just in terms of how do you create something from scratch and how do you bring people together. And yeah, I think just any story like that is really interesting to me, particularly when we are in that, as a business ourselves, in a moment where we're trying to make connections and trying to create something. So I think to see how somebody and some people have really successfully done that. I think there's so many things that are interesting about your deep knowledge of Sheffield and that also broader point about the regional ecosystems. I think it's really fascinating, and I love the passion that you have for, when we were talking the other day, just preparing for this, and you're talking about you'd just been at the AMRC and seeing this huge contraption and how fascinating it was. I think I'm also really enthused by the potential in the city and all of these really amazing things that people haven't heard about. So if people want to keep in touch with you or anything you're up to, what's the best way for people to do that?
Well, if you're interested in Sheffield Digital, go to the website, and everything you need to know you'll be able to find there. That's just sheffield.digital. If you want to make contact with me, the best way is through LinkedIn. But if you do want to connect, please tell me why. Because remember, it's about starting a relationship.
Great. Thank you. Well, yeah, thanks so much. And yes, we'll catch up soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me and for bearing with me while I ranted on about all the things I'm enthusiastic about.
No, not at all. No, it's thanks so much for coming on. It's been really, really great. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks.